Hey team, and welcome to another video in the Astrological Magical Elections video series. Today we're going to talk about the magical electional opportunities that are going to be available to us between the Sagittarius full moon and the Cancer new moon, so from June 5th to June 20th. And so of course this upcoming full moon is a lunar eclipse, our Sagittarius lunar eclipse, and so generally my warnings about eclipse magic and talismans are, still in effect all the time when it comes to eclipses. Typically, you don't want to utilize them for talisman making or for magical purposes just because they always carry around a heavy kind of toxic, dangerous energy associated with them. So just kind of in general, they're not really useful for kind of those more conventionally good things that we would typically like to create talismans for. They can kind of be utilized in like ritual work for purging, kind of the more extreme cleansing type rituals, but generally there are configurations that are gentler and are just as conducive to that as eclipse points are. But you may consider, making an eclipse talisman and throwing it at a white supremacist head or burying it on their property. So if you want to kind of utilize eclipse magic for more conventional good, that would be an avenue to explore. So if that's a brand of magical activism that interests you, definitely give it a whirl on top of other more conventional methods of activism. But we're going to go ahead and jump right into our electional opportunities for this 2-week period. And kind of after a little while of not having a whole lot going on for it, it seems like the past few videos, North America finally has a good amount of charts to utilize for this 2-week period that Western Europe and Australia will not get. So because we're dealing with a waning moon period this time, after a full moon, we always have the waning moon. We're dealing more with giving away and giving back and getting rid of things. So some of our electional purposes are going to be a little bit different this time, kind of compared to like normalcy, we'll say. So our first electional opportunity is going to be for June 14th at around 8 a.m. my time. And here we're going to use a first Lunar Mansion talisman. Generally, the first Lunar Mansion talismans are more appropriate to the waxing moon phase. So the waning moon phase first Lunar Mansion talisman is kind of different. It's utilized a little bit differently. Whereas when the moon is waxing in the first lunar mansion, it's a good time to initiate projects, to increase motivation or to encourage completion or activity for a thing. So it's kind of your wake up, get out of bed and go talisman. But in a waning moon phase, it's a little bit different. Here it's more, instead of encouraging energy to move forward, here it's helping energy to relax and move back. So this can be very useful for individuals who are struggling to relax. It can be very useful for individuals who feel themselves kind of spread out too thin between a lot of different things or a lot of different projects and aren't really giving a good amount of themselves to any of those things, and so basically not really doing well enough to make progress in anything that they have kind of over pledged themselves to at that time. So this can be a great talisman to help to restore energy by rest. Also really great to help you kind of prioritize better about what's going on, and to help you understand or know where is the best place to invest X amount of energy to get the most return out of. So it can be really helpful to help you like prune out some of those obligations or commitments that maybe aren't super gonna give you a great return or are gonna help you accomplish whatever goal that you're really looking forward to, help you understand what things maybe to take a back seat from, to really be able to concentrate more on those things that are more helpful or more in line with kind of your own purpose. So something to consider with this mansion. It's not your get up and go and finish all the things or finally do that thing you've been putting off for so long. This is more of the rest, relax, recuperate, and at the same time take stock of all the different things that you've decided to do, maybe when you were feeling super energized and now have kind of lost that motivation. So taking a look at our election for this talisman, we have the moon here placed in the first mansion, conjoined the midheaven, and she's applying right now this square to Mercury in the first house in Cancer. So of course, square aspects are always a little bit less ideal than the trines or sextiles, which are easier, gentler, more friendly, but sometimes you have to work with squares. And so we're lucky in this instance to have the connection with Mercury, because we're still kind of dealing with the retrogrades. As you can see in the chart, we got Venus, Saturn, and Jupiter, who are still retrograde. So, the moon can't apply to them, which leaves only Mercury, the Sun, or Mars. And we can't have the Venus-ruled, Jupiter-ruled, or Saturn-ruled signs on the ascendant. So really kind of narrowing down our options, still working within that. And this is an opportunity, an example of an opportunity that is maybe a little bit less ideal than we would otherwise like to have it, but still checks all of our boxes. The moon, the ascendant, and the lord of the first house are still unafflicted by malefic planets, and so we can still use this chart to accomplish something or to help us better understand what we ought to be accomplishing at this time. So our second electional opportunity is actually for the next day, June 15th at about 8:30 a.m. my time, and here we're focused on a second Lunar Mansion talisman. So when the moon is waxing, the second Lunar Mansion talisman is used to get favors from people in authority. Typically you would use it for negotiating promotions or raises, or just kind of seeking some kind of thing from a person who is, quote, above you, or maybe works in an organization that you want to work with or work for. Just kind of that kind of going to somebody and asking for a thing, generally within the context of career or reputation or something like that. But when we're dealing with the waning second Lunar Mansion talisman, here we're focused more on the removal of anger, is how it's kind of worded in traditional texts. And so the second Lunar Mansion talismans, when the moon is waning, can be good for reconciliation. They can be good for forgiveness, maybe even kind of more generally, or maybe not generally, but maybe more literally, for helping to deal with anger issues for individuals who struggle with, controlling their anger or anything like that. It can also be a good talisman to make sure that people do not become angry at you, to help make inroads to, forgiveness and understanding through that route. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to have been wronged and that you are angry, but if that other people are upset with you, or somebody that you care about is mad at you, this can help you kind of get that ball rolling towards forgiveness and understanding. I also like to refer to this as the anti-road rage talisman, for people who like to carry it with them while traveling, if that's a phenomenon that you often encounter. So looking at this electional chart, it's kind of a very similar setup to the previous one, where you have the moon in the second Lunar Mansion close to the getting close to the midheaven. I didn't want to go too far down with the ascendant into Cancer, or too far into late Cancer with the ascendant getting close to Leo, because we have to worry about the Saturn opposition, so I wanted to keep that kind of far away. And while this is happening, the moon is applying the sextile to the sun in the 12th house. Kind of another interesting power associated with the second Lunar Mansion is the ability to find lost things. So I like this idea of the moon in an angular house applying to the sun, who's bringing light to hidden and lost things in the 12th house. So this could be another way to utilize this as something like a St. Christopher medal, if you ever need that. We all lose things, of course, so this can be a great way to help find them when that happens. The third talisman we're going to talk about is a little bit different, but it is one that all three kind of places that I look at will be able to utilize. So this is one that is available in North America, Western Europe, and Australia, whereas the others, or the talismans that we talked about so far, have only been North American in their scope. And this is for a fourth Lunar Mansion talisman. And when the moon is waning, the fourth Lunar Mansion talisman is for the eradication of pests. So this is kind of like your pest control talisman, getting things that you don't like out of your space, or out of a space. Hopefully your space. Hopefully you're not just throwing it around and driving pests out of random places. But this chart, I know a lot of people are looking at this and it's like, what is happening? What is this train wreck? Because this is not a good chart, and it's not a conventionally good chart. It's a more destructive chart, and these kind of pest control talismans are meant to be made that way. So here we have the moon placed in the fourth Lunar Mansion, and she's a little bit far from the midheaven at this point, which isn't too bad. Typically you want her as angular as you can, but it's not so bad to have her in the 10th house or in the 11th house and things like that. So here we have the moon in the 10th house, and she's applying this sextile to Mercury in the 12th house. For places in the Mountain and Pacific time, you might not be able to get the moon applying to Mercury, in which case the next aspect will be this sextile to Mars. And I don't hate that either. That's totally fine, especially if Mars is more in the 8th house for that location at that time. So while that's happening and you have the moon applying either to Mercury or Mars, depending on your location here, you'll have This early Leo rising, that's important, because what you want is you want to have the sun as the ruler of the first house conjoined the north node, and that helps with the whole pests being purged and kind of flushed and driven away aspect of it, that kind of forced out, that kind of happens or is associated with the nodes. And then at the same time, you want to have the ascendant degree opposite Saturn here, kind of as close as you can. And this is kind of your general framework for these more difficult pest control talismans. You're kind of setting them up to be a little bit more difficult and destructive, because the idea is that that sense of kind of celestial discord or disharmony is then kind of thrust upon the pest that the talisman is being aimed at. And then, of course, that's kind of the idea or the thing, the driving force that pushes them out. Of course, while the general kind of pest control framework of, afflicting the moon and the ascendant helps kind of with anything that might be construed as a pest, the sign on the ascendant helps kind of to determine what is most affected by it. So because we have Leo on the ascendant, which is a feral sign and associated with wild animals, this is going to be something that is most useful, most in tuned to helping rid a place of wild animals. So if you're, in a situation where you're having trouble with like deer or things like that, if you wanted to get like super appropriate, super on the nose with the symbolism, like, mountain lions or things like that, then this will be, exactly what you need. If, this will still be useful for things like bugs or, rodents or what have you. But just because Leo was on the ascendant, it's a little bit more fine-tuned for that wild animal problem. It'll still work for everything else, but that's kind of more the tool that it's more specifically to fix. So this is that same chart, that same fourth Lunar Mansion chart now set for the Western Europe equivalent. And here, the things are basically the same. You have the moon here in the fourth mansion, in the 10th house. This one is much more angular on the midheaven. And you have the 19 degrees Leo rising. Still the sun as the lord of the first house can join the node. And you can utilize this one. That's totally fine. Or if you wanted, you can, go back and make it more exactly like the election chart for the North American continent. Just getting, 1 degrees Leo on the ascendant to maintain that Saturn opposition with the ascendant. You can totally have that. The moon, of course, will become much less angular. So that's kind of the trade-off there, whichever one you want, but you're still going to have this sextile to Mercury happening either way. So that's another option to utilize for those in Western Europe who would prefer. Now we're going to go ahead and jump to the chart for the fourth Lunar Mansion talisman in Australia, and they have what's kind of the more ideal setup, we'll say, for it, where they are able to have the moon in the fourth mansion exactly with the midheaven, still have that early degree Leo rising with the sun conjoin the node, and have the ascendant opposite that Saturn. So they kind of check all the boxes, while at the same time they get the moon applying the sextile to Mars in the 8th house. So the Australian chart is really the more ideal version of that between the three different locations. But whereas the other two locations, Western Europe and North America, their chart is set for the morning of June 17th. In Australia, it's the morning of June 18th around 9:45-ish a.m. So, definitely take a look at that. Definitely utilize that if you are kind of struggling with some kind of pest control. I know here in, the northern hemisphere, it's starting to get summer, and we're starting to see a bunch of the bugs and stuff that we typically try to run from. So this could be a really great way to help kind of combat that without, resorting to harsh pesticides or chemicals. So the final election we're going to talk about tonight is going to be an opportunity for an algal fixed star talisman, primarily aimed for, protection. And this is not what I would call an ideal talisman under a lot of different circumstances. It kind of checks all of the boxes, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I just know that there are a lot of people who could probably utilize something like this right now. So this is something that I would recommend utilizing on a temporary basis until something a bit better opens up a little bit down the road. So here, and another thing also is that individuals in the Mountain and Pacific time will not be able to utilize this chart because the moon will have moved over into the next aspect. So, keep that in mind. This is going to be one of those Central and Eastern time zone only things for North America, and this is something that's only available for North America also. And this chart is set for June 18th at around 4 a.m. And here we're going to have the moon on the ascendant applying that conjunction to the fixed star Algol, which is at 26 degrees. And while that's happening, you're going to have the moon applying the sextile to Mars very closely, as you can see, 23 degrees Taurus in 57 minutes to 23 degrees Pisces in 59 minutes. So just within 2 minutes of arc, very quick. And you can miss it in a flash if you don't pay attention to it. And so we want the Mars aspect, or we want a Saturn aspect, because our goal is of the nature of Saturn and Mars. And so when we're doing fix our talismans, we want the moon's next aspect to be to one of the planets that is associated with the nature of that star. The reason why our friends out west won't be able to utilize this talisman is because after this Mars sextile separates, the moon will apply to the trine of Jupiter, who is neither Mars nor Saturn. So it's not as potent, it's not as good, it's not as kind of in the moment as it is otherwise with the Saturn or Mars aspect. But we can still get some utilization out of this for people who are putting themselves, in potentially dangerous situations, protesters, to be able to utilize to keep themselves safe and those around them safe. But like I said, because of the nature of our goal being a bit more of an aggressive, protective star, and the ruler of the first house in this chart is retrograde, not super stable, we'll say. This is something that I would only utilize on a temporary basis until something better opens up a little bit on down the road. But of course, if you need something now, then you need something now, and this is kind of the best option for that I have to offer at this time. So those are all the electional opportunities that we have going on for this 2-week period. Still kind of struggling with those retrogrades, stuck between these 2 eclipse points. And these talisman opportunities are kind of smashed within just a few days there between the 14th and the 18th. So hopefully there's something that interests you guys in those talismanic offerings, something for you guys to work with and practice with. Remember, no eclipse magic, don't curse yourself, and I'll see all of you again during the Cancer solar eclipse.